What's up, gentlemen? Happy to see everybody for another episode of the Blind Pig, courtesy of BGObsession.com. As we roll on into the front office acquisitions, building out our coaching staffs, and roster building is coming at us like a complete freight train.
Come
Um,
on.
Before we get rolling totally, I'll quick intros. Top left is John. He hails on the site as Boone. Bottom left is Chris. He hails as Chris. Bottom right is Mark. You can find him as Ohm. And my name is Derek. You can catch me at Silent Threat. So please come by, mix it up. If you guys are messing around, anybody that's listening, we also did a collaborative yesterday, John and myself, with the Burgundy and Gold Knuckleheads, who we had the pleasure to meet at the tailgate for the game against Arizona, week 1 for the home opener, the first game under Josh Harris. They were really cool guys. They have their own pod, so we were thought it would be cool to mix it up and get a couple more people's perspective on things that we don't generally interact with. So all that being said, we figured we'd collaborate a little bit tonight. I'm thinking we've talked a little GM, we've talked a little head coach. I'm curious about Chris and Mark, your reactions to the Kingsbury and the Joe Whitt Jr. hires. What's your initial reaction, and where do you think we go from here?
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I didn't get a chance to weigh in on Quinn much. Can give me like 30 seconds
Do
on
it. Do it.
that? Looking at this big picture now that we're on the other side of the process, and we've all had a chance to hear and listen to and watch a little bit of Dan and what he's like. My guess is 90% of the fan base that had more of a problem with him is probably feeling a little bit better about it. Because if there was ever a guy who sort of exudes what our GM said he wanted in a coach, right? He stressed it several times what he wanted. He wanted leadership. You're not going to find too many guys in or out of the NFL that sort of exude that. And I mean, you have to feel like they nailed it that way. What Looking back on it, I know there was the kerfuffle about Ben Johnson, and a lot of people wanted McDonald, including me, by the way. I bought into the coordinator hype, just like, I mean, I'm a fan, right? I was told that this was bound to happen, and it's a pretty viable theory that you want the young coordinators these days. Um, if I can be perfectly honest about it, I convinced myself I wanted McDonald, not even as much because he's got such a great rep as a defensive coordinator, but because everyone says he's got leadership, that he exudes leadership. So that's kind of why I gravitated towards that. I just want to say this now. I'm not taking any credit for anything other than I don't remember if I ever said on here that the only real concern I ever had about either of the two coordinators is how young they are. And that is not my model. My preferred model for building certainly an NFL team in 2024 is to have a head coach who's a head coach and two dedicated coordinators. I think the job, unless you're Andy Reid and you got Patrick Mahomes, the idea of trying to be a head coach these days and coordinator and everything else, not to mention on a startup venture like we've got here, I think it's too much. So I end up feeling like we got the exact structure that I wanted. And in Quinn, we're going to find out. I mean, that's one of the reasons I was so into the Mike Vrabel thing, because I viewed him as a CEO leader type with coordinators. So I think the guy we got, whether he's a bridge quarterback or not quarterback, if he's a bridge coach for the next 4 or 5 years and we get the program running and we're sort of contending but not getting over the top, that would be a nice problem to have. And then maybe it's time to talk about young coordinators and all that. But I really think they nailed it on this guy. And a big part of that is going on to the coordinators and getting dedicated coordinators, which we've done. And before I use up the first half an hour of the podcast talking, Chris, why don't you talk about the coordinators? Then I'll throw in if I have anything else on that. But
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to talk about Quinn either.
Well, rock and roll. Come on, boy.
come on.
And inherent in the process of all of these interviews, I was handicapped because I'd never had any intimate knowledge of any of them. When it became obvious that Quinn was going to be the selection, I wasn't depressed or down, but I wasn't thrilled either. I think on the board, I think I gave him a C, maybe a C plus, because I couldn't vote for it. So I think C plus in the comment section. But after watching the press conference, solid B, if not better to me, based on the press conference. And the one thing that I liked of what he said, so much that I liked, but a lot of it was like, yeah, football, was when he said he's not going to call the plays. He's not going to call the defensive plays. He's gonna coach the team.
Yep.
And then, the absolute piling on of ex-players and other professionals, coaches in the NFL, just singing his praises from the rooftop. I'm now led to believe that he is exactly the right guy at the right place at the right time. And like Mark, I don't know if 3 years from now that's going to be true, but I think the state that the roster's in, the amount of work that needs to be done, setting up a winning culture, which is, I would like to replace culture now with winning culture.
Thank you.
I think it was a great selection. Coordinators.
So before we get to the coordinators, I heard John Kimes say, and Kimes done a great job. He's been one of the few, media guys that has said all along, like, hold your horses. I haven't heard anyone that actually matters saying they want Ben Johnson, et cetera. But he said something today that I don't agree with. And his premise was, or on the pod, in the last 48 hours, he said maybe Dan Quinn wasn't their first choice, but he was at worst, he was their second choice. And I don't think that's true. I think unless you're calling McDonald the first choice, I really think we were headed towards Mike McDonald. And there wasn't, and all the stuff about, well, they wanted to hire an experienced head coach because they had an inexperienced, Adam Peters in the GM role. Well, first of all, Adam Peters maybe hasn't been a GM, but he's not inexperienced. He's been in the thick of it for multiple years with one of the best run organizations in the NFL. So technically he may be new, but he's been doing a lot of GM stuff, in San Fran. So I think McDonald, if we could turn back the clock right now and convince McDonald to come here, I would do that in a heartbeat. It's nothing against Dan Quinn, but what we don't know about Dan Quinn, the experience, that's all great. That sounds great. And we said a lot of the same stuff about Rivera, by the way. And I'm not saying he's Rivera, but we said a lot of the same stuff about the leadership, and it didn't really pan out. That doesn't mean it won't pan out with Quinn, but I do think there's the big elephant in the room to kind of counterbalance all the kudos he's getting and the props he's getting from people that know him, and that's not a small thing. That's a big thing. But I think the counterbalance to that, or the counter argument, if you wanted to be super skeptical, it would be, well, yeah, he got to a Super Bowl, but maybe it was mostly Kyle Shanahan that got him to a Super Bowl. He also got fired because it all fell apart, and as soon as Kyle left. So I'm not saying any of that. Maybe he has learned. He did, all the 360 stuff that he's talked about. He's certainly well liked and well respected. I just don't know in the long run. It'll be interesting to see, like 5 or 6 years from now, whether McDonald is the all-star coach or whether Dan Quinn is, or maybe neither one of them will be. But I'll just put that out there. If we could have gotten McDonald, I just have a feeling about that guy, that he's really football smart, and he's also got what Mark was alluding to. He's got that. He's not a shrinking violet. He's vocal with in his coaching role, or at least he has been in Baltimore. So anyway, I'm
Yeah.
perfectly happy with Quinn. And I think most of the fan base, it was more a function of what we were led to believe. And we had just gotten the #1 GM candidate, right? Like he wanted to be here. He didn't want to go anywhere else but here. So I think in our minds, we were like, everything's changed. We're going to get whichever coordinator, our perception is that is at the top of the list. And when that didn't happen, I think it freaked most of us out a little bit, like, well, what the hell? But I think
Did we ever get confirmation that we did in fact make a hard job offer to Mike Macdonald?
I've seen multiple reports of that, maybe even when he was on the plane on the way to Seattle.
Yeah,
I'm
that's what I
surprised.
heard.
I'm surprised that that hasn't been directly asked, but they weren't going to ask it at the Quinn press
That's a
conference.
Quinn intro presser. Yeah,
That would
that'd
be
a great time.
That would not be in good taste. But yeah, I the impression that I've gotten is that there was an offer on the table of some kind.
If that's the case, then Peters did what the world was saying he should do, and we had all bought into it too. I would have been thrilled if McDonald had been here. Don't get me wrong. And I would have voiced the same concern, though. The man is 36 years old. He's going to have players in his locker room as old as he is and older than he is. Being a great coordinator with leadership skills doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a coach, so it was a huge gamble to go.
It's like trying to find a quarterback, right?
Yeah, it is.
You might think you found one, but until you know you found one, you found one.
I'd like to make two quick distinctions, in my opinion, on the Quinn v. Rivera topic. Rivera never had an opportunity to reflect on what went wrong in Carolina. He went like a couple weeks without a job and had a job again. Quinn convinced me that having that time off and that time to reflect and review was important, and hopefully that does show a big difference. The second part was that Rivera not only came here without any time to reflect, but he was also pretty much given total control over the personnel. And Quinn's not coming here to have total control over the personnel. And I think those are two very distinct, important differences between them.
Yep.
I actually watched yesterday. I went back and pulled up on YouTube Rivera's, the Happy Thanksgiving Everybody clip of the whole press conference of Ron Rivera being introduced, because I just wanted to kind of check in my mind and be able to contrast it to and again, even with Dan Quinn, it's still just a press conference, right? But it was a pretty glaring difference, because what I didn't hear Ron say, and maybe it was because of what you just said, Chris, because he was just thankful to get another gig right out, 2 weeks after he had lost his job. I didn't hear him say prove it once. I didn't hear him say anything that indicated that he had anything to prove, or that
You're talking about Rivera, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He talked about how Dan Snyder had independently come to the conclusion that what Washington needed was a coach-centric philosophy. I mean, we should have known right out of the gate that if he's crediting Dan Snyder, it's
a problem.
Genius idea of going coach-centric, and that Ron Rivera was a perfect guy for that. So anyway, this just was a totally different tone. It was kind of like, in fact, Rivera even made the comment that, like, yeah, I probably could have gotten a job somewhere else if I'd have pushed to get more money or whatever. It was all about Ron and him just being the natural candidate to be the next head coach of Washington. And it was really almost the polar opposite of what we heard from Dan Quinn, which is, I've learned, I've made mistakes. This is where I went wrong. How excited he was to have a second opportunity. I mean, that just came through in spades from Dan Quinn. And I think that is really what has gotten fans that maybe weren't excited like me at the initial announcement a little amped up and a little juiced, like Mark described. So anyway.
Was I the only one to gulp when early on Quinn says, I want to be where my feet are?
Yeah, I heard it too.
I'm sure somebody's clued him in those are
Yeah.
trigger words. Don't.
Put that on the down low. Yeah. Like rebuild. I can't use that.
I liked him better as he went along. At the beginning, he was a little bit scripted and a little bit tight, and he was reading off his little piece of paper there in front of him. But 5 minutes into the thing, he's just riffing and talking and having a ball. I particularly like the whole thing about how he's pulling out his phone and checking it to make sure it's working when he's waiting for the call. I don't know, he seems like a good dude. And again, I'll double down on it. I love that we have the formal old structure that we have. We've got a head coach who's a head coach, gets it, doesn't want to be the offensive coordinator, doesn't want to be the defensive coordinator. He wants to be the head coach under a GM who he's working with. I can't tell you how happy I am about that.
And additionally, he doesn't have to worry about the stuff above him. He doesn't have to worry about the color pants they're wearing Sunday. He doesn't have to worry about stadium location and changing the name and answering questions about why your owner's a tool,
Well, hopefully.
Well, yeah.
Josh, get your shit together. Keep your shit together.
Josh is okay for a basketball guy.
Yeah. So that comment came out of Ben Johnson. As far as I understand it, the only interview he had was a Zoom call, I think, with Myers and Spielman, right? It wasn't Josh and it wasn't Peters. That's the only meeting he had with us, or did I read that wrong? They never met with him in person.
I think Peters and Myers and maybe Spielman, I don't know. I think they all sat in on the initial, just like introductory part of it.
I might go back and look at that because I remember being struck by, wait a minute, he didn't even have Peters in on that, which surprised me. So I may be wrong on that. I'll check it out.
I could be wrong too, Mark. I don't know.
We'll look it up. But that would say something, right? That you kind of wonder about the process. And anyway, I don't want to go back to and double down on Johnson. My firm belief is had they actually met with Johnson and sat in a room with him, he wouldn't be the coach anyway. I don't think they would have hired him.
I just wonder how he could jump to the statement that he thought that these basketball guys were too confident in their NFL abilities if he didn't talk to any of the basketball guys. So I don't know who he talked to.
Well, good luck.
It's all a bad look. The whole thing is a bad look now. From the way that comment came out to the way it went down about being how it was reported about how they got the information to the team, that the team learned about it on Twitter, and then a little while later it was via text message that Johnson actually reached out. And again, I'm not piling on Johnson, but at the same time, that's just not the way you run a business, At least that's what you would hope for more, especially for somebody that's going to be your head coach.
I think everything we've heard about that whole evolution, it just speaks. It screams that intimidated to me.
Right.
That he was intimidated, even just being an adult. Like, I mean, you think his agent would tell him, "Look, they're on the way here. Just do the interview, and then you can tell them if you want to stop the interview." And say, guys, I don't want to waste your time. I've thought about this, but I wanted to show you the respect of telling you face to face. This is kind of what I'm thinking. I don't think it's quite the right time, and I would be doing you a disservice because I'm not feeling it 100%. They would have graciously accepted that, and then they'd have moved on to Aaron Glenn or whatever.
And hell, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm throwing my hat in the ring for a big, huge promotion and a big step up in my job responsibilities, and I get offered an interview, even if I don't in my heart of hearts intend to take the job, I'm sure as fuck taking the interview and getting the experience and looking and sitting in that room and taking notes in my head for future reference. It's just weird to me, the whole thing. But this is why you do the interviews, right? This is why they talked about Peters and Harris before the whole coach thing started. That it's such a big deal in the interviews because they knew that these were the hottest coordinators. So they put them on a list. We're going to talk to the hottest coordinators, but you got to talk to them. You got to look them in the eye.
Yeah. He self-identified himself as I'm not ready in big screaming neon letters.
Yep.
He's a couple years past the millennial age group, but it was very millennial that he couldn't make a goddamn phone call. He had to send a text message.
Mm-hmm.
So we have coordinators.
We do have coordinators.
Derek, use those sterling vocal cords, my friend. Talk to me about. I want to hear your take on Mr. Kingsbury first.
Kingsbury, I'm intrigued about. I don't know that I'm overly excited, but I'm definitely intrigued. His track record in Arizona was a little concerning. It was hot and cold, and that's my only concern. And I wonder what's going on, what happened, what ultimately happened with Kyler, because they originally drafted Rosen, and then in Kingsbury's first year, they were 1-1, and they took Kyler, electing to move on from a first round quarterback, which is still, to me, that's a huge risk. And it was almost like he would, I don't know that he could have succeeded, because if you give up a first round, if you have a first round quarterback in the second year of his deal on a rookie contract and you still elect to take a quarterback, you better be right.
He's a
Otherwise,
coach, Derek. He's not the GM. I mean,
I
we
know,
don't-
but I mean, that's just the mentality, is like, if they're going to invest 1-1 in a coach, they have to be right. You know what I mean? Like, fair or not, there's, if you're wrong there, that is devastating to your franchise, because now you've spent 2 first round picks in consecutive seasons on quarterbacks that didn't work out. So whether it's fair or not, I think there was a lot put on him, and I think ultimately that's what got him run out was, and it might not have even been his fault totally, because I'm not confident in Kyler as a quarterback. I don't know about you guys, but I do. I know. I mean, I know that team was. He was in the MVP conversation for at least one season while Kingsbury was his coach.
his numbers were good. He got better every year. The team got better every year. It was that fourth season where they just collapsed.
Right.
And I think part of it is the ownership, man. There's a reason why the Cardinals have not torn it up for the last 20 years. And it's part of it's kind of the same, similar to some of the challenges that we've had in Washington. There's no patience, and I'm not saying he would have turned it around. Who knows? But I just look at it differently because they had a pretty good offense. They got better every year. Their stats got better. Their record got better. They got to the playoffs, and then, Murray gets hurt. I don't know what else went on that fourth season, but I think they had a lot of injuries.
Well, tell me if I'm remembering this incorrectly. Weren't they were like far and away the first place team for a while, and then there was just a collapse
Every
towards the end of the.
season, every
What?
season, Derek. Every season, Derek.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So I want to say they started out almost at like 9-1 or 8-1, and then they ended up finishing that season limping into the playoffs, and then they just
Yeah, 2021, they ended up 11-6.
and they started the season.
Oh, what we wouldn't do to limp into the playoffs.
I know. I'm telling you, at 11-6, we haven't had an 11-win season since '91.
So
But you're misreading me. I'm not knocking Kingsbury, but what I'm saying is, I think he didn't. I think he was set up to fail, because I think that the emphasis on Murray going 1-1 after you're now giving up on another rookie first round quarterback, the ownership and the GM are looking at that like, this better be right, and if it doesn't, they're gonna have to make a drastic change, and he's the guy. I think he's dealt with a lot of big name personalities. I mean, this guy got Johnny Manziel in a Heisman conversation, and Johnny Manziel went into the league and has never turned into anything near what he was his final year in college. He dealt with Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, and Kyler Murray in Arizona, and so now, how much of that is him being around great talent, or how much of that is him taking great talent and creating and getting the most of it? That's the debate that's open. But I'm excited about him. I'm intrigued about him, because I think he's gonna give us something we haven't had in a while, and that's a forward-thinking offense. And it's not gonna be a stubborn forward-thinking offense, but it is gonna be a current offense, something that we've missed.
Have you guys heard? I've heard this a couple times, and at first I thought that sounds like BS to me, but I've heard it like 4 or 5 times from different people that he was coming into work at like 3:30 in the morning. Like, that's his routine.
There was a local,
like 3:34 in the morning, watches film for like 6 hours. I mean, he's apparently he's got like that Gibbs thing, man, where he's like, when
So
he is in it.
here in Virginia, there was a guy on 1067 who was a beat reporter who was doing a story on another aspect of the Cardinals. And they said they heard the rumor that Kingsbury was in the facility at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he said he was down there for a week doing the story. So he said, you know what? Screw it. It was a random Wednesday or whatever. He got up, he got to the facility. He was sitting on the steps of the facility at 4:06, and here comes a white Escalade, and it was Kingsbury going into the facility at 4:06 in the morning. And he said, he said, hey, what's up, man? Come on. He's like, what do you want a cup of coffee? And he let him in. He went straight to the gym. He got his workout in. He went straight into the film room after that.
I think it sounds like a guy who's born to be a coordinator, right? I want a
Right.
film rat who's in there in the laboratory at 3 a.m. That's what McDonald down in Miami. He's the same guy. That's exactly how and he's doing it as a head coach. We'll see how that works out. Kingsbury, if I remember it right, the Cardinals, this is the way I kind of remember how it happened. They hired him to be head coach because they were going to draft Kyler Murray and they wanted Kyler Murray's coach. I think he was doomed from the beginning. I've been saying this since I first saw Kyler. I don't think he's an NFL quarterback. I think he's an amazing athlete who makes some amazing playground plays a few times a game. But I watched some games of his this last year again to confirm this for myself. And if he drops back 30 times, he will not plant his foot and throw on schedule ever, ever. His game is to roll and move. And when he's on and when the defense can't keep up, that can be very effective. But that would drive you nuts as a coordinator because however diabolical your schemes are, if the quarterback doesn't run it, it ain't going to work out well. So I agree, Derek. I think he was set up to fail because ownership brought him a quarterback that he couldn't win with.
And he seems to have attitude, like some attitudinal issues.
Kyler?
Murray.
Oh, yeah.
Like I heard that at the end of that last season in Arizona, they basically like weren't even speaking, almost that bad of a relationship. And yet you don't hear anyone else talking about like how hard Kingsbury is to get along with. None of the other former quarterbacks have anything but like glowing comments to say about the guy. So it makes you wonder, that's not a good situation when you're entrenched starter who's probably got a lot more juice than you do, right? Having been taken that high in the draft, if anyone's going to go, it's not going to be
him.
Right. So,
well, what made it even weirder and crazier is they gave him an extension. A big money extension.
Yeah, they paid him off to make him happy, and keep from having to blow it up again. Did any of you get a chance to listen by any chance to Logan Paulson do some breakdown of Kingsbury's offense and the air raid offense? I'll try to find a link and post that. It's really good, and I highly recommend that everybody listen to it. Nutshell, he said that the air raid, which has now evolved over the years, is not very far in concepts from what Kyle does with that Shanahan tree offense. It's all designed about creating space. There'll be wide sets on the outside. Quarterback will operate out of gun, but not exclusively. And it's just all about isolating your playmakers on the outside in as much space as possible and stress the defense to cover all these guys. He did say, and this is I couldn't believe I heard him say it. The one thing he said, and I don't know if you guys remember me bemoaning this with the same analysis of EB, was that his running schemes, the stats aren't terrible, but that the running scheme that he's running, at least per Logan, I'm not a film guy, but I'm going to research this more if I can, is not particularly sophisticated. It's a fairly basic run game behind all this misdirection and everything in the pass game. That to me is always going to be an alarm bell because I watched how it fell apart with us here with EB. If you're not sophisticated in the run game a little bit, and you've got a week where your pass pro breaks down, your quarterback's under duress, you got to be able to run the ball. And I'm going to be watching that carefully, and I'm hopeful that Adam Peters sort of maybe sees the same thing and has taken steps or plans to take steps to modernize and upgrade that run game as well.
Well, Kingsbury's run game has always been effective.
It was,
The numbers aren't bad, but you know what I wanted to do there was break it down by sort of the splits, early season, late season. What's it going to look like in December in Washington and Philly and New York when
Mhm.
you got to be able to grind out that first down. The run stats of Kingsbury's, I mean, I pulled them up. I don't want to be a stat guy, but Kyler Murray's, he's averaging 6 yards per run or 8 yards per run, and that counts in those run game stats. I'd need to see a little bit more breakdown on it. And I'm not saying that this is the way it is. I'm hopeful that that's not the way it is, and something I'll be watching for.
I think the other thing too is, I get the feeling from what I've read and heard that he understands the value of having a dominating O-line, which that's a mystery to us for the last 4 years. Although, I know there are people that argue that we weren't that bad. To me, looking at what we've watched for the last 4 seasons, it's been pretty bad. It hasn't been great on the O-line. So maybe that'll be a big help. And I think he's going to look at B-Rob and say, "Holy cow, man, this guy should be a focal point of our offense, whether he's running it or passing it or catching passes." I just always felt like we underutilized him for the talent level that he had.
Well, it felt like we underutilized all of the running backs. Gibson was another one that
Yep.
would where's Waldo? Like you lose him on the field sometimes, and you wonder why you're not exploiting that. And all Kingsbury did was turn Kenyon Drake into a relevant running back in the NFL, and he's done nothing elsewhere. If I'm remembering correctly, so
I wonder who the quarterback coach is going to be, man. That's one of the shoes I'm waiting to see drop, because I don't know. I'm not smart enough or savvy enough when it comes to college football to know like what kind of a quarterback's coach would Kingsbury be looking at, and I mean, who's he been connected with that he might. I mean, maybe he won't be the one to decide that. I don't know, but
I bet. Well, he should be, right?
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like those to be his guys.
And I would personally, I would like somebody that is younger, and that's your grooming of your natural progression in the event that Kingsbury gets hired away in 3 years, as your quarterback coach is growing with the team.
We tried to snag another Dallas's tight end coach, right? To be the O-line coach. I believe that was the plan. And they finally got worked up a backbone and said, "No, that's not happening."
Oh, I'll be very unsurprised if Logan Paulson ends up on the coaching staff, unless Logan makes a decision that he doesn't want to dedicate that much of his life to coaching.
Quinn,
they have a love affair.
They do.
Quinn did kind of a brief interview today with Craig Hoffman. I was trying to listen to it right before we came on, and he actually talked about Logan Paulson. So he definitely knows him. They know each other, and we all know. I mean, Logan Paulson was beside himself with praise for Dan Quinn before it was official, to a lot of groans from the fans who all thought it was going to be somebody else. But
I've become a big fan of Paulson and his breakdown stuff. He's not trying to impress you with how much he knows, and he doesn't couch shit. He talks football, and I've learned a lot listening to him, and have yet to really have anything come out of his analysis that just looks or dead wrong to me when I see it on the field. So I would not be surprised either, Chris. I think Logan is already coaching at high school level. So, it's not a big step.
We've done that before.
Plug him in there as the tight end coach or whatever. No, I suspect we're going to hear his name around more, and I'm really okay with that. He's a good guy. But Kingsbury he's got some big job to do, and he's going to have. I'm wondering how much input he's going to have in the quarterback selection, right? I mean, it's got to be you. Hopefully, if there's a quarterbacks coach, you'd like to think he'd be involved, but it's got to be Kliff and and Peters, right? That the two of them, you want them putting their heads together and thinking, all right, this is our guy if we can get him.
Well, I guess I think UNC runs the air raid. Certainly, Caleb Williams is familiar with his offense. So no matter what kind of crazy things happen, and I don't think crazy things are going to happen, but even if they did, he's kind of like when I was talking about Ben Johnson being super familiar with the UNC guys with Hal and Drake May. We're set up well because, you know, at least two of the top three quarterbacks would be theoretically nice fits in the kind of stuff that he likes to do. But then again,
So
maybe way off in left field on that.
I don't know. I can't speak for you guys. I know almost nothing about Joe Whitt Jr. I know he's followed Dan Quinn for over a decade. They've worked together. So at a minimum, Dan Quinn's defense that he's been putting out there, Whitt is very, very comfortable with it. And from what and to your point, Chris, Whitt will be calling the defense. I don't know how much he'll be tweaking it, but so I'm assuming it's going to be Quinn's defense. Whitt will just be running it, or at least calling the plays on Sunday. So I don't know much about him. Obviously, Quinn's really confident in him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be dragging him, everywhere around the country with every new job he gets. So I know their defense. I know their secondary was one of the best in the country in the game. Uh, and I know a lot. I know a lot of that had to, or I believe a lot of that had to do with scheme. Obviously, they had talent, but I'm curious to see, and we might not know the truth of it, but the dynamic of whether Quinn is managing the front seven while for the majority of the time, while Witt's managing the secondary, and then that comes together on game day, or if it's all Witt's baby. I don't know. I'd be curious to see how that works. I just don't know what we're getting to see it.
So I nerded out yesterday, and because I didn't know anything about Witt, so and I don't know if this means anything. I'm just going to share it with you. I looked at the passing defense rankings because that's what he's done. He's been a DB's coach pretty much his entire NFL career. He was with the Packers for a ton of years, then the Browns and the Falcons for 1 year each, and then of course the last 3 with Dallas. All I did was look at the team's pass defense rankings for every one of those seasons. Out of 15 seasons, his defensive backfield was top 5 3 times, top 10 7 times, top 15 9 times, and worse than that 6 times. So he's had a pretty good success with what he was tasked with doing. And there's a lot of variables in that, right? Because it's all about what personnel did he have, and a lot more than just, I mean, I don't know how much you can draw from that, but he definitely has had pretty good results in the coaching roles he's had up till now.
His defenses that he coaches on are, and I'm not going to go through all the stats either, but the emphasis on turnovers is really big, and they've been very successful in generating turnovers everywhere he's been, which seems to be a nice little fit with our underperforming secondary from last year, right? He turned Bland down in the Cowboys that nobody had heard of. All of a sudden, Bland is setting an NFL record for returning picks for touchdowns. Well, we got a guy in Forbes that we drafted to do that.
And we're well familiar with it because at least one was against us this season, right?
So that seems like a great fit to me. Well, just looking at this guy's career, he was a walk-on at Auburn as a receiver. You walk onto an SEC team and make it. You got some balls and some wanna, right? And he's just been grinding now for, when did he start in the NFL? In
2009.
2009. So for 15 years, he has been grinding, and all of his defenses have been relatively successful. If this isn't a guy who's ready for his shot and hungry,
Yeah.
And I mean, he was with McCarthy. He was, by the way, he was
He
on,
lasted a decade with the Packers, man. You don't last it. I mean, that's rare that anybody
and he
lasts
was
a
on their
decade.
Super Bowl. He was on their Super Bowl team in 2017 too. I'm intrigued by that. He just strikes me as this. I mean, I've never even heard him talk, but you just get the sense of a tough career NFL grinder who doesn't going to take any bullshit from anybody on that team. And if anyone knows our head coach's defense, if anyone knows Quinn's defense, it's got to be this guy, right? So if anyone's going to be calling plays but Quinn, this is the guy you want doing it if you like the way Quinn's defense works. So I'm excited to see what he has. He's not coming with these sterling credentials as a coordinator, so it's a question mark. But you gotta love the makeup of a guy who's walked the road he's walked to get here. Come on, show us, do it.
He's also a coach's son. Joe Whitt Jr. is a lifer at Auburn University as a coach. And I think even maybe it's Quinn said it that Joe Jr. was around Auburn from about the age of 5 all the way up through the time he went to college. And I've always liked coaches' sons. You know, I mean, Sam Howell's a coach's son.
Tough, right? Tough to be a coach's son.
Yeah. I
Because
mean,
they coach you harder than anybody else, anybody that's ever.
and if nothing else, coming here with the success he's had with NFL secondaries, coaching NFL secondaries, he's got nowhere to go but up with this team. So
yeah, I agree with that.
Do you guys think that I'm wondering about Nate Katzer, whether they're gonna retain him? You guys have any thoughts about that? I was looking at our special teams rankings from this year. We were second in the league on touchbacks. We were 7th on kickoff returns. We were middle of the pack on net punting yards, believe it or not, because our coverage is not very good, even though we've got a great punter. And then we were like 25th on punt returns, return yardage. But I feel like our special teams has been greatly improved since he took that job. I mean, it's a low bar from kind of some of the stuff we saw before him, but
Well, and I think we all had a bar mentally set from Danny Smith, right? If there's one coach that we all were happy about having, it was Danny Smith, and then he ended up leaving, and our special teams just went to absolute shit.
And so much of that is attributable to the bottom of the roster, right? We have not had good draft.
Yeah, very, very true. Very true. And it also is the what appears to be the most unstable position in NFL is kicker for the Washington football team, because we can never
we're like a farm team, man, for the rest of the NFL.
we can never seem to lock in on a guy that can be consistent at all when he's wearing our uniform, but he goes elsewhere and he's a Pro Bowler. So there's a lot of factors there. I think, I don't know, man. I think special teams coaches, unfortunately, are kind of not a throwaway, but they're just not prioritized. You know, so I don't know that you would hold a guy over, because they probably view that there's 10 guys they could bring into that position. But they're not moving fast and furious now. I mean, we heard about Whitt and Kingsbury, and since then I haven't heard of a single hiring.
Kimes said there might be a couple coming like within the next 24 hours. I don't know whether that he was just speculating or whether.
Certainly by this time next week, you got to expect it, right? Super Bowl's over. Anybody we're waiting to talk to, we can talk to. I think by the end of next week, we've got most of those people in place. As far as your question, John, is it Kazor? I've never known.
It's Katzer.
Katzer.
How it's pronounced. That's what the team site says. Katzer.
My sense of him last year, the whole year, was that I thought he did a pretty damn good job of making soup out of the chicken shit that they handed him. I mean, the roster he just didn't have the horses, but the special teams held their own. I thought they did. We never did find a punt returner, which was frustrating, but that's not on him. You know?
I don't know. I think Crowder was more than serviceable.
Crowder was serviceable, yeah, serviceable. Which around here, I guess that's big, but that's never a position that at least not one that we've taken seriously here. That since I can remember, I put that on Rivera, squarely on Rivera, because Yeah.
his ridiculously conservative approach to like returns. It's like, teams do return kicks and punts occasionally, punts more than kicks for obvious reasons, but
That 10 yards on a punt return is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
The
Well,
difference
and
between-
Rivera's
like-
priority was making sure the guy could catch the ball.
right. I mean,
And as
That's-
long as he did that, it's why we saw Dax Milne back there for how long? Like
I think it's 7 years. I think.
that's what it felt like. So, but yeah, to your point, I think the last time we actually put an emphasis on return game was Steven Sims Jr.,
Yeah.
who, by the way, returned a punt for a touchdown in the playoffs.
Yep.
And then before that, was Brandon Banks, and then we had Rock Cartwright and some other guys that
Mighty
came
Mouse.
back. But yeah, the games can be broken. I mean, when you're talking about the difference between winning and losing, that changes huge in flipping field position, if nothing else. A 10 to 12 yard punt return is a big deal.
we need some physical and explosive guys back there. Is what we need.
One last thing to touch on before we sign off. Did you guys see the report about Bieniemy today?
Talking to Kansas City?
He went and got in front of the meeting room and broke down a play installation. A bunch of people are like, this guy's still technically under contract, so I don't know that he's even allowed to do that. And he's out there prepping the Chiefs for the Super Bowl. Do you guys have a problem with that?
They had to have fired him, right?
I don't know.
I mean, he
I'm just
going to be
hearing
working
that
together.
Sorry, Chris.
I'm sorry. I mean, Quinn said, we're not going to be working together.
Right.
So I would assume he was like, see ya.
I would assume so too, but
Yeah.
still, that's just not a good look.
Yeah.
At least, like, is he even supposed to be in another
Like-
team's room right
Like
now?
George Costanza showing up at work after pretending he didn't know he got fired, right? Kind of got that vibe to it.
Yeah.
I
Was
bet
that
this-
serious? Was that serious?
Is that wrong?
I bet these next couple of days, there's just a tremendous amount of networking going on in Las Vegas for coaching candidates and
Yes, big time.
people.
What
talking.
about, so we got a comment on Dallas, like trying to replace Quinn. They interviewed Ron, for God's sake, which, I mean, okay, that's good. Good luck to him. But then I heard they interviewed Rex Ryan today, which
Ryan?
Rex
Mhm.
Ryan's been out of football for like a while, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has.
On one of the pregame shows. I don't know if it's CBS or Fox.
Yeah, he's been on CBS.
He's got a great tan.
If Jerry
I
wants
think-
him, he's just gonna-
Honestly, I think Dallas is in a position that they're going to be in a lot of trouble if they're not careful. And it's not just losing Dan Quinn. Don't I'm not trying to inflate that, but if you look at the way that their roster is built, they're spending a lot of money in certain places, and like Micah Parsons is going into his 4th season, so they're gonna have to pick up his 5th-year option, and they're gonna be paying some of these other guys buku money. They've already almost basically dismantled their offensive line, and then now, how much is this is the Dan Quinn leaving effect gonna have? Ripple effect gonna, not necessarily the X's and O's, but how many guys are going to leave because the defense might take a step back, and what's the long-term ramifications of that?
I mean, you have to think it's going to have a huge effect, unless, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how it could not have an effect, man. You lost 2 coaches of a top 5 defense.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, a really popular defensive coach, right? Who was doing really well right up until that last game. So we have to talk Super Bowl, gents. We need our predictions and keys. I'll do it first if you want. Get
Sure,
you
go
guys
for
a
it.
chance to get your thoughts together. But anybody who's been or heard me talk about quarterbacks knows that Mahomes is my favorite player in the NFL.
No way.
I love the way he plays the game. I think he's doing things that no quarterback's ever done, just in the way he distributes and all that. But that's not the key to the game. The key to the game is Spagnuolo versus Kyle Shanahan.
Mm-hmm.
That Kansas City defense is the reason they're in the Super Bowl this year, despite, I mean, they've got Superman on offense, but their defense shut down the Baltimore Ravens. Nobody saw that coming. The idea of a Spagnuolo defense versus a Shanahan offense is just going to be fascinating to me to watch. And I ultimately think that's going to be the difference. I think Spagnuolo is going to do just enough to get Purdy, who's going to make some great plays and play his ass off. I don't think it's going to be enough. I think Spagnuolo gets the better of him just enough, and Mahomes closes the deal, and Kansas City wins, but it ain't going to be easy. I think it comes down to like the last 5 minutes with Kansas City probably trying to hold on to a lead and Purdy trying to make a run. I think it's going to be 27-23 is what Karnak says. This is going to how that's going to work out. But I think the story after the game is going to be that defensive matchup with KC versus the Niners offense.
So
All
I
right,
think
I'll
it's
go next.
Go ahead, Derek.
The Mark, I will mimic everything you said because I can't bet against against Pat Mahomes.
I can't either.
I can't do it.
Excuse me.
But the only difference, I will even call the same score, but the only difference is I think it's the Chiefs with the ball in their hand last, and they go down and score to take the lead.
I can see that too.
Late in the game, and then, holding off San Fran under 30 seconds or something. Less of a concern on the defense and more of Mahomes leading the Chiefs down for a late touchdown and end up pulling it out 27-23.
So I told Mark, we were chatting about this a couple days ago, and I'll say this: there's no rational reason not to pick Kansas City, just given their history and what Mahomes has been able to do. And they're also, I think they're kind of coming on more so than any other team in the playoffs. They got better at the end of the season. They look shaky as hell through a large part of the season, especially on defense. Now they look, I mean, they did that last game. That defense was just unbelievable. But I'm not going to pick Kansas City. And Mark knows one of the reasons is I can't stand Mahomes. But the real reason is I just have a feeling, two things. I think Kyle has underperformed in the big spotlight up till now, right? I mean, he's heralded as this great coach and offensive mind, but when push came to shove in the big moments, it hasn't really materialized. So I think instead of what we've seen through most of the playoffs, where they kind of played relatively conservatively and tried to control, kind of do ball control stuff, I think he's going to let the young guy go in this one. And I think they're going to be a lot more aggressive in terms of taking chances. And I think McCaffrey, that's really the key to the game to me, because McCaffrey has played like a bat out of hell. And he just looks like a guy that is determined to end on a winning note. And I know it's just one player, but when he's on, he's almost unstoppable. And I know Mark countered with, yeah, that's what they're going to do. They're going to, they know that, and they're going to do everything.
Spagnuolo knows that too. Yeah.
He does, but just knowing that you need to do it and being able to do it are two different things. So I'm just counting on McCaffrey. I think McCaffrey's going to be the MVP of the game. And I think they're going to get to Mahomes with the pass rush, which teams don't seem to be able to do very often, but that's what I got.
What's your final score?
I don't know, 31-29.
San Francisco.
Nice.
Yep.
Well, I wanted Detroit and Baltimore.
So
I'm viewing this game as the same way I view just about every election that I've had to vote for. And that's the lesser of the two evils. I don't like either one. But if I have to pick somebody, I'll say Kansas City by one more point than San Francisco. And I can't pick 1-0, so whatever. Just Kansas City by a hair.
that's like the one score we can't have.
17-16
by a hair.
I like it.
Any score, or are you just gonna say Kansas City by a hair?
17-16 Kansas City.
Ooh, a
There
low
you go.
scoring
Taking
game.
taking the under. Chris, I would just like to thank you for the discretion in your background. I do not see that word anywhere on that screen.
You know where else you didn't see it? In the press conference when they were on the screen.
It was on there before Mark
Yeah,
Hines
but-
went down.
But when they came in and sat down, it wasn't on there anymore.
Well, they moved the camera because Mark Hines' bald head was right in the middle of the screen. So I think they just bumped it up.
Okay.
I love it.
All right, fellas, we're gonna run this thing back at 4 minutes under an hour. So it's been a pleasure. And I'm sure we'll be getting together a lot more over the next few weeks because there's gonna be a ton of stuff to be talking about.
Hey, sweethearts, it's Valentine's Day on
Yeah.
our next podcast. So
Oh,
bring
great.
flowers.
Oh, that's probably not good. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Have a good evening.
Night, guys.